And but it's yet to come. Wait. And she's a very impactful psychologist, and she's most well known for her research on multidimensional measure on well-being. It has been translated for more than 30 years. Unlike many of the quick and dirty tests in parapsychology, her research has enduring value because it's rooted in a scholarship of deep understanding of existential psychology and personality, social psychology, and neuroscience, and she was able to weave them all together into a beautiful tale. So I thereby crown her the mother of existential parapsychology. And either second that.
Thank you. I'm really honored to be here. This meeting, this is the first time I've been to this group, and it's like an intellectual homecoming for me. Because, thank you for that wonderful comment. Yeah, I started in this business reading existential and humanistic and developmental psychology. I mean, really reading it and taking it in a very deep way. And then I kind of did a detour for about 25 years in a lot of biomedical research. And I'm going to take you on a bit of that journey today, because I'm feeling we've really reached a time in which that world needs to be a lot more connected to this world. And so it feels really good for me to be here with all of you. I have really enjoyed the talks that I've heard so far, and I'm suffering from jet lag because I was at another conference in Japan before this, but amazingly, I'm not falling asleep in any of these talks. So thank you for being here. So I'm going to begin, just for the fun of it, with some snarky comments about positive psychology, which I believe I deserve to express, given my history and the whole story here. So there's been a lot written and said about what's wrong with positive psychology, and I'm talking about the initial creation of positive psychology, the initial leaders of the so-called movement, and one of the things that drove me crazy about these initial pronouncements that this whole new movement was occurring was the obliviousness to what was already there. Okay? Existential and humanistic and developmental psychology were there and had been there for a very long time. So the failure to actually acknowledge those areas troubled me greatly. I also felt, and there are many common themes in my presentation and Itai's presentation, there's a lack of intellectual heft in a lot of the original thinking. I also was actually troubled by the preoccupation, the marketing, the money-making angles behind a lot of positive psychology. But in my view, the core flaw is this partitioning of psychology by valence into positive and negative. That makes no sense to me, because all lives encompass both. And I think what's the challenge we face, and many people are addressing it, especially at this meeting, is how do we put the positive and negative together? And I just want to note, I gave a keynote address at the European Positive Psychology meetings in 2012, and that was my title, Contradiction at the Core of Positive Psychology, the Essential Role of the Negative in Adaptive Human Functioning, which I think most people here are persuaded by. So Dmitry Leontiev I don't know if he's with us here yet. He is coming to the meeting. I saw him in Japan. He organized the meeting in Moscow, and he put me onto this fabulous book after the meetings. This is a book written by a French philosopher with a sort of sneering condescension that you get from great French philosophers. Perpetual euphoria on the duty to be happiness. I loved the book. I mean, I was doing handstands while I read this book. It was ministering to my soul, my frustrations, describing this perpetual euphoria and the advent of banality, quoting from Voltaire's Candide that felicity and vacuity go hand in hand, even referring to the amiable twaddle of the Dalai Lama, and asserting that it is better to lead a life rich with tears than a happy one without meaning. I just thought this was fabulous stuff. And at that meeting, I also wanted to, I think we all need to read this distant stuff that is just, some of it is so compelling and is so fabulously written. There's nothing better than William James for writing about psychology. So in the varieties of religious experience, he has this fabulous chapter on the sixth soul, which he called morbid-mindedness. And this was his characterization. Those who know that all natural goods perish. Riches take wings, fame is a breath, love is a cheat, youth and health and pleasure will vanish, and the skull will grin at the end. I mean, that's spectacular, right? That makes you want to be morbid-minded. But he also, and I really paid attention to this chapter, his chapter about healthy-mindedness, those whose souls have sky blue tint and who seem to have started life with a bottle of champagne inscribed to their credit. Fabulous, right? But the interesting thing is William James really formulated those as two separate types, even though he himself was a blend of both. Actually, as was his brother Henry James, and even Alice James. What an amazing family. If I could ever have chosen to be a fly on the wall, it would have been in the James family. Because William James and his brother and his sister suffered intermittently from depression, but they nonetheless displayed these soaring heights of healthy-mindedness and just incredible capacities for human expression. I also wanted to just draw attention to this earlier work about putting the positive and negative together, because a lot of people here are using the phrase dialectical styles of thinking, dialectical emotions, and I've been fortunate to collaborate with a number of people in Japan for the last decade, and Yuri Miyamoto and I put together this paper some time ago about dialectical emotional styles, drawing on Buddhist traditions to talk about the blending of the positive and the negative, the balance between the positive and the negative, as opposed to non-dialectical styles, where the prescription is to just be loaded with positive affect and have a paucity of negative affect. And so this was basically a place where we tried to grapple with those ideas empirically and link them to different health outcomes. Okay, that's not what my talk is about. My talk is actually about this. I do want to continue to probe what I would refer to as the deeper dialectic between the darkness and the light. And I want to do it via eudaimonic well-being. So I'm going to say some things about the conceptual foundations of this model that I developed a long time ago. And I want to underscore one really important point, and that is that every one of the 6 dimensions embeds the negative in the positive. And that really needs to, I think, be understood. And then I'm going to talk about the enactment of eudaimonia in the face of adversity, and I'm going to give particular attention to the challenges of aging, which we can all look forward to. Aging is part of the life journey, and it involves loss, and it involves decline, and it involves fundamental existential challenges, and it becomes a really interesting place for studying things like meaning and purpose in life. And I'm going to show you a lot of data but I'm going to show to you quickly, so don't worry too much about that. But I'm going to show you a lot of evidence that with aging, older people who maintain high levels of purpose in life are just functioning so much better, including living longer. And I'm going to just say a little bit about interventions that I've been connected with to promote eudaimonia. And then I'm going to talk a bit at the end about eudaimonia and the arts, which has become my new thing. And I'll engage in, as I have already, assorted digressions and tangents along the way. Okay, so going back to Aristotle, the Nicomachean Ethics, an amazing book. I mean, starting out with the ultimate question: what is the highest human good? Aristotle's answer was, it's eudaimonia, which he defined as activity of the soul in accord with virtue. And then he said, okay, so what is virtue? And what is the highest virtue? And his answer is the highest virtue is realization of our true potential. That's what the daemon is. It's the unique spirit within each of us. And our task in life is to figure out what that uniqueness is and run with it, develop it, grow with it. So it is a kind of excellence. It's about achieving the best that is within us. And there were other ancient Greeks. I mean, what an amazing period in human history, Hellenic culture of 2,000 years ago. I mean, all these people asking these really big questions. And certainly there were other people who were writing actually about hedonia, about the pursuit of pleasure and satisfying of appetites. And it's not then surprising, I think, that in the present era we have this continuing engagement with the sort of hedonia, happiness, positive affect domain, and the eudaimonia, purposeful life engagement, self-realization domain. Okay, so I want to just say a little bit about this publication that has kind of taken off, and the measures have taken off. And I was toiling in the wilderness. I mean, I'm doing this stuff 10, 15 years before anybody's talking positive psychology. And what am I reading? I didn't actually start out by reading Aristotle. I got to Aristotle later. I started out, I was trained as a lifespan developmental psychologist. Social gerontology, at that point in time, everybody was studying life satisfaction as the ultimate indicator of successful aging. And I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, well, why life satisfaction? There's no conceptual foundation, there's no theory, it's just, okay, this seems like a reasonable one, why don't we just take off with life satisfaction? And I thought, I can't believe everybody is focused on that, given what Erickson wrote, what's in Jungian perspective, Bueller, Maslow, Frankl, Rogers, all of these different people. That's the work that I read, and I said to myself, okay, what do I want to actually run with in my scientific career? Do I want to put all my chips on one of these people and their thinking? And I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it because I thought none of them are so much better than the rest. But they're all kind of reaching for some formulation of optimal, adaptive human functioning. And so the 6 components of well-being that I came up with essentially are points of convergence in these prior formulations. And the hand is there to symbolize reaching for something new. I mean, reaching for something new, the ideas were there, but what was new was the integration of these components, these prior perspectives, and the translation of them to empirical assessments. Okay, so then I have some imagery to give you a flavor for the 6 components of well-being, and I have my dear friend Dov Shmatkin from Tel Aviv University to thank for these images, which Dov's wife Malka and I have a birthday on the same day. And so he remembers my birthday with images of one sort or another every year. And so this was a year where he said, Carol, I sent you some images for your 6 dimensions, and I love them and I use them in all of my talks. And so this is kind of a thumbnail sketch of what the components are about. Autonomy is very much about marching to your own drummer. Environmental mastery is about managing the external world. Personal growth, this is the one that I think comes closest to Aristotle's idea of eudaimonia, self-realization, and I really like this imagery, which is from the 19th century, because it kind of depicts physical growth and decline. And a really important point here is that even while we are aging biologically, the imperative for self-realization and personal growth never stops. And that's what makes life wonderful and meaningful and fulfilling as people move across the decades of aging. Positive relations with others, I don't know how well you can see this, it's la maison en fait. Taking care of your social relationships, this is by far the most universally endorsed aspect of what it means to be functioning well as a human being. In philosophy, in psychology, and it obviously makes sense, right? That's how we survived in an evolutionary sense. This was my favorite image. It is Raphael's painting of the School of Athens. I mean, an amazing period, as I've said before, Hellenic culture, Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, Pythagoras, Euclid. I mean, incredible, just incredible. And you can take a look at this painting in Rome. And the last image was for self-acceptance, which is about accepting your strengths and your weaknesses. Now, I'm going to go back through these very quickly to basically make the point that every one of these dimensions is dialectically rich. They embed the negative within the positive. So what is self-acceptance? It is not superficial self-esteem or narcissistic self-love. It is about recognizing your strengths and your weaknesses, the shadow from the Jungian formulation of individuation, the shadow that lurks within all of us. It's about, as Erickson said in his final stage of ego development, it is about gaining a sense of acceptance with regard to the triumphs and the disappointments of your life. Purpose in life, finding meaning, pursuing goals in the face of challenge and adversity. Okay, this is Viktor Frankl's domain. He's the guy who basically conveyed to all of us, you can find the deepest meanings and purpose in your life in the face of even horrific adversity, sustained horrific adversity. So here the idea is that adversity is the path to meaning, which is, I'm preaching to the choir here and making those points, and I know that. Personal growth. What is personal growth about? Developing your personal talents and capacities via the challenges of life. And that's always about, I think, digging for inner resources, thriving amidst obstacles. And when I was in graduate school, probably, anybody here has ever even heard of Klaus Riegel. But he wrote a wonderful theory, a dialectical theory of human development. And the key idea, which made so much sense to me, I thought, yeah, this is just right on, is that crises and contradictions are essential for development. They are essential for development. Some of that's lost on this slide. Environmental mastery is about creating an environment in work and family life that suits your needs. This demands effort and action. Work and family life is, invariably about engaging with problems and conflicts and challenge. So it's about proactively seeking a kind of person-environment fit. And then autonomy, I think, and I recognize it's really quite a Western component of well-being, this marching to your own drummer. But it's anchored in, many formulations in the West about following your personal convictions, even if they go against conventional wisdom. That is what Jung meant when he wrote about the deliverance from convention as a part of individuation. So it may require having the capacity to stand alone. Positive relations with others, I think we would probably all agree that managing our relationships is a continual challenge of ups and downs. We published a paper some years ago called Elective Affinities from Goethe's writing about romantic love and juxtaposed it with uninvited agonies, mapping emotion with significant others onto health. And that chapter is in a book that's out on the table, and another contributor to that edited volume is Ryff, who has done a lot of research on the topic of intimacy, which he defines as being able to reveal your vulnerabilities and not be rejected. I love that definition of intimacy. Okay, so the measures got, developed. They ended up being translated into like 30 different languages. They have a life of their own now. I'm not in charge of any of that. I'm just following it. There are now over 500 publications using these scales. And in 2014, I wrote this review of about 350 of the studies. And I tried to kind of organize it. Like, what are people using these measures to do, to look at? What are they investigating? So there's been a lot of attention on the psychometric properties of the scales, as there should be. Does the six-factor model really work? And the majority of evidence is that it does. And the reason it does is because the enormous care that went into the scale development process. It was built on a construct-oriented approach to personality assessment. I followed Douglas Jackson's approach to developing the personality research form. You start with theoretical definitions. That's where you start. And then you write items that reflect the theoretical definitions. And then you do a lot of painstaking item analysis to refine the item pools. And I think that's why the six-factor model works quite well. I'm going to say in my talk quite a bit about adult development and aging as a focus for these measures of well-being. You can see these other domains that have been assessed as well. I'm thrilled that the family sociologists and people who study occupational life, occupational psychologists, are trying to link these components of well-being to these real-life, everyday contexts. Also focusing on work, on volunteer engagements. But I'm going to give several examples from the linkage of these measures to health and biomarkers, and then the clinical and intervention studies. But I just want to make this observation. I'm looking at all of this work and I'm thinking, how did this happen and why are so many people using these measures? And I think it has something to do with this, that these phenomenological indicators, they are about subjective experience. They capture core aspects of what it means to be human, to strive, to be proactive, to make meaning, and as articulated by Aristotle, to pursue the highest good that is within us. I just want to draw attention to, this is a book soon to appear, and several people at this meeting have chapters in this handbook assembled by Vitorso, Handbook of Eudaimonic Wellbeing. In my chapter, I went back to this formulation, and I basically went after the beauty in these ideas. because I think they really are beautiful. And I tried to articulate why I think they are beautiful. And beautiful ideas can be compelling sources of intellectual vitality in the work that we do. A tangent that I want to throw in here about the importance of these eudaimonic topics. John Stuart Mill's autobiography is one of the great reads of all time. If you have not read it, don't miss it. Those only are happy, he said, who have their minds fixed on some other object than their own happiness, on the happiness of others, on the improvement of mankind, even some art or pursuit, followed not as a means, but as itself an ideal end, aiming thus at something else. Happiness is found along the way. It is a byproduct of other more noble deeds. And I also want to draw attention to, this is going to be a kind of sub-theme, and I think we need to not only think about individuals, we need to think about communities and societies in which people are embedded. And there's some really spectacular thinking going on in that front. In 2014, I attended this conference at the University of Humanistic Studies in Utrecht in the Netherlands. And this was the conference theme. Could anyone think of a more beautiful theme? A meaningful life in a just society. I thought it was magnificent. And what I took away from that meeting, and what I am now practicing in my work, I'm collaborating with these people, we need more humanists at the table. I mean philosophers and people from the arts as well. I also think eudaimonia has the potential to be an important antidote to contemporary social ills. And to illustrate those, I go back to Dante. Kirk Schneider also, I think, mentioned Dante. These are the 9 circles of hell. And, I mean, this is an amazing work, which I listened to on tape as I was driving cross-country one year. And I was blown away by the genius of Dante. So I want to draw attention to just some of those circles of hell because they really capture contemporary, societal, worldwide problems of gluttony, greed, dishonesty, fraud. Thomas Piketty, the contemporary French economist, got a lot of attention for his book, Capital in the 21st Century. It about inequality as one of the major challenges worldwide of our time. And even Adam Smith, you know, the guy we can thank for capitalism and, you know, self-interest and the invisible hand of the market, even he wrote about greed. This vain and insatiable lot do not know the limits of their own appetites. I think eudaimonia, if it's taken seriously, if it's really embraced, if it's really cultivated, in children and adults in society, it can be antidotes to some of these contemporary ills. I just want to draw attention to, this is about virtue. We know that, and there are lots of people in lots of fields who are getting serious about virtue in everyday domains of life. I love this book. This is basically, you know, in the world of ethics, there's deontological ethics, there's consequentialist ethics, and then there is, from Aristotle, virtue ethics. And virtue ethics is about these kinds of qualities, and this is an edited book that anchors these kinds of qualities in several different domains of life. It's worth the read. Okay, this brings me to Midas. Midas has consumed much of my time and energy for the last 2 decades. It's a major national longitudinal study in the United States. It's about advancing knowledge of factors that promote health and resilience. We now have over 12,000 people in the study, many of which have been studied for 20 years, and the content is wide, diverse. My passion is multidisciplinary integration. What all of us know is not enough. We need to connect it to what other people No, you can find this brochure on our website. The data from Midas are publicly available, and the scientific community has come in droves because it's such an interesting data set. These are, you can find this table on the website. It lists all the different topics that people are using this data set for. You can see that there are over 150 publications on the topic of well-being. This is the website. Visit it. The data are beautifully documented, user-friendly. They're just out there for anybody to work with. And one of the first findings from the Midas baseline research was this finding. It was a national data set showing that hedonia and eudaimonia are related but distinct components of well-being. It was important to establish that empirically. They have different correlates, different predictors. And now I'm going to go through very quickly what we've learned about eudaimonia and aging, where we first see evidence of vulnerability in certain areas. Vulnerability having to do with purpose in life and personal growth. And this is where we first saw these downward trends on purpose in life and personal growth in the cross-sectional data for women. Here's the cross-sectional data for men. I'm just drawing attention to the downward trajectories on purpose and growth. Here's the longitudinal data. Those cross-sectional indicators are real. We now have 3 longitudinal aging studies, 2 of which are national, that make clear that on average, purpose in life is declining as people age, as is personal growth. Why is this happening? Why is this happening? Sociologists have written about this as the structural lag problem, which they define as our social institutions have not kept up with the added years of life that many people are now experiencing. So opportunities for meaningful and purposeful engagement are not as present as they should be. But there's a lot of variability around those means, and some older people remain engaged, purposely engaged, and if they do, all kinds of great things happen. So this is where I'm quickly going to show you that purpose in life predicts longer lives, reduced disease, better physiological regulation. We're figuring out how it works in the brain. It's involved in gene expression and health behaviors. I'm happy to send this presentation to anybody who wants to dig deeper. I'm just giving you the punchlines here. Purpose in life predicts longer lives across adulthood. And this is a recent, this year, meta-analysis of over 130,000 people showing that higher purpose in life, including a construct in Japan called ikigai, which means what makes life worth living, predicts reduced all-cause mortality and reduced risk of cardiovascular disease. There was earlier evidence from the Rush Memory and Aging Project showing that purpose in life predicts longer lives. It also predicts reduced risk of Alzheimer's disease and biocognitive impairment. And in this amazing study, they get people to donate their brains after they die so that they can actually quantitatively assess the degree of organic pathology in the brain. And here's the deal. What they find when they link how much organic pathology was in your brain after you died, they link it back to how are you functioning cognitively while you're still alive. And guess what? The dividing line out there at the far end of organic pathology, those 2 lines, those who had high levels of cognitive function while they were still alive had high purpose in life. So there's something amazing going on there, probably compensatory processes in the brain. From the Health and Retirement Study out of the University of Michigan, we know that purpose in life predicts reduced risk of myocardial infarction, even among those with heart disease, reduced risk of stroke, better health behaviors. If you live long enough, you can look forward to having sleep disturbances. Many people have disrupted sleep. But if you have high eudaimonic well-being, you sleep better at night, probably because you're actively engaged during the day. Purpose in science, this is where we get into biomarkers. It produced reduced levels of physiological risk. Allostatic load is a kind of summary index of many different physiological systems. Aging, this is a study where another thing that happens in normal aging is that people begin to experience increased chronic conditions. That's called comorbidity. And comorbidity fuels further inflammatory processes that can lead to even more forms of chronic conditions. But purpose in life and positive relations with others are moderators of the link between comorbidity and inflammatory markers. That's basically what these graphs are about. I spent a lot of my time over the last 15 years studying inequality. I really care about inequality as a sort of, I think it's a major theme that we should devote time and attention to as researchers. It's a major contemporary problem. And this is a study where we show that people with lower levels of educational attainment have higher levels of a certain inflammatory marker called interleukin-6, which is implicated in various disease outcomes. And that probably reflects the fact that people with lower levels of education on average have more stress in their lives, have fewer resources to deal with their stress. But guess what? Higher eudaimonic well-being is a buffer among the less educated. And that's basically what these graphs show. People are now, this is really important for those of you in the group here who are very interested in this, how do eudaimonia and hedonia come together? And this is basically making the point in gene expression. It's gene expression related to inflammation. So there have been 3 replication studies, and in the recent meetings in Yokohama, I listened to a 4th presentation or 4th set of findings from Japan, making this point. Higher eudaimonia is linked with better profiles in terms of these gene expression markers related to inflammation. So if you have higher hedonia, there's upregulation of pro-inflammatory cytokine genes that fuel disease endpoints, and downregulation of the better gene expression, antibody synthesis. It's the opposite pattern with eudaimonic well-being. I mean, and many people are like, how can this be? How can they be showing opposite patterns? But they are, and it's been replicated multiple times. Eudaimonia and the brain is, I think, important for us to understand. This was the first study that basically showed when you put people in the neuroimaging magnet and you show them negative pictures, different things, there's a different blood flow in the brain. So those who are more quick to evaluate negative stimuli while they're in the neuroimaging magnet, they show greater activation of the amygdala. The amygdala is linked with negative emotion. But if you have higher psychological well-being and you're in that neuroimaging magnet, you are slower to evaluate the negative information. There's less activation of the amygdala and increased activation of the anterior cingulate cortex. And they're basically saying the anterior cingulate cortex is basically helping appraise the information as less negative. So there's brain processes operative here. From the MIDAS study, we have higher purpose in life, showing better emotion regulation, again using neuroimaging assessments. This study I really love. It's about reward circuitry in the brain and how it's linked with eudaimonia and with daily profiles of salivary cortisol. So here's what happens in this protocol. You're shown positive stimuli. Positive stimuli activate reward circuitry in the brain, the ventral striatum. And for people with high eudaimonic well-being, that activation lasts longer. And the fact that it lasts longer also predicts better profiles of daily salivary cortisol. I mean, this is worth digging into mind-body relationships and how they work. But what's unique about it is that it's got this subjective stuff in the middle of it. So there's growing evidence that eudaimonic well-being is good for a lot of aspects of health. That, to me, is part of the argument that we should all be making about why people in your world, with your expertise, your talents are needed on a much wider scale, in many more contexts, to basically be promoting these positive aspects of meaning and purpose, because they will make for better societies with reduced healthcare needs. Promoting well-being, this is probably, many of you know about the work of Baba. He was the first person to connect with my model of well-being, and he used it to basically develop something called well-being therapy. I don't have time to describe it, but it shows dramatic improvement in remission profiles in treating people with recurrent depression and also people with anxiety. Chiara Ruini, many of you know her work. She's doing fabulous translation of basically the well-being therapy approach to prevention in the school context, teaching these qualities to children and adolescents. And in Wisconsin, we are doing a community-based intervention with older people in the community called Lighten Up. And it's basically teaching them about the importance of well-being, how to cultivate and sustain well-being in their lives. It's an 8-week protocol. I'm happy to send a paper around about this. I would also be happy to send around this review that Chiara and I recently contributed to the Handbook of Positive Clinical Psychology on using eudaimonia to improve lives. So future directions, I need to go through this quickly. This is the part I care about the most. So why did I spend all my time on this other stuff? I don't know. I'm justifying what I did for the last 2 decades. This is a Venn diagram to basically kind of illustrate the disciplinary richness of the Midas study, which I'm really proud of. We've got all kinds of psychosocial factors that come out of different subfields of psychology and human development orientations. We have the big population perspectives, the epidemiology, demography, sociology, sort of economic players in the mix. And then we have the neurobiological mechanisms, factors, how does it all work? How do these psychosocial and sociodemographic things make their way to health endpoints via physiology and genetics and the brain? But what's missing? What's missing? There's a ton that's missing that makes my heart break. We don't know anything about what these people are taking in terms of the arts. Encounters with the arts, whether it's art in the street, art in the museum, painting, photography, music, literature, poetry, dance, film, theater, nature. I think these are powerful mechanisms for nurturing well-being, and it's happening. I mean, in the UK, the Royal Society for Public Health, which is, like a big, high-status enterprise for saying this is what we should be studying and care about. In 2013, they put out a report called Art, Health, and Well-Being, which is a wonderful summary of all kinds of things going on in hospitals, in communities, in educational contexts. There is really running after these themes of the arts. And I'm a voracious reader. That's part of my daemon, I think, just like take it in. And so I just want to draw your attention to, and it's really important, books about the arts and humanities and promoting well-being. Most of these are recent books, except Sean Dewey. Read that book. In 1934, he writes this incredible book about art as experience, in which, I mean, he just digs into, like, how did we take it in? How does it have this big impact for us? But there is now a whole subfield. This is just happening in the last, 5 years, called health humanities. And it's designed to basically change the training of physicians so that they would be more compassionate, because maybe they learned something about compassion by reading the humanities. Helen Small has this wonderful book. She's a philosopher from either Cambridge or Oxford. It's kind of pedantic, it's kind of tedious, but it's a lot of really important points about why we need the humanities. They're not just entertainment. They're not just fluff. They are core parts of who we are. And then on the outer sides of the bottom level, I have Alain de Botton. I don't know how many of you follow his work, The School for Life. I think his books are fabulous. The guy is just full of audacity. I mean, he doesn't cite anybody. He's not pretending, that he's, read it all, but actually I think he has read much of it. And he just writes these incredible books. I'm going to be talking about these things in my workshop this afternoon because I'm obsessed with this stuff now. So over on the far corner is How Proust Can Change Your Life. And I believe he's right about this. I believe Alain de Botton helps us understand one of the great neurotics of all time, Marcel Proust, can actually change your life. And then in the middle, I'm drawing attention to this fabulous book by Mark Edmondson. He is a professor of literature at the University of Virginia. And he's passionate about teaching great literature to his undergraduates as a way to understand how to live their lives. So in every one of these great works that he takes them through, the question is, can you live it? Can you live it? Is it really telling you something that you need to know to live a great life? He also has another more recent book called Self with Soul, A Pursuit of Ideals. It's, again, about great literature, but in that book he's saying we need to read great literature to find our way to courage and contemplation and compassion. And because this group is so full of kind of dialectical thinking, I mean, how could we leave out Pablo Neruda's Odes to Opposites? I don't have time to go into any of these examples. This is just a table of contents where he writes an ode to the present and contrasts it with an ode to the future. An ode to fall contrasted with an ode to spring. I mean, and all of this is so uplifting. The man was just an exquisite human being who enriched all of our lives and continues to. This is my last slide. It brings me back to the question of contemporary strife, the refugee problem, ethnic conflict around the world. This is an amazing book about medieval Spain. So we're talking about Spain from about 900 to 1300, in which Christians, Jews, and Muslims lived together peacefully. They learned each other's languages. They wrote poetry in each other's languages. And I believe that part of it, the first and major message of this book is that it can happen. It can happen. You can have people of these different faiths and cultural backgrounds living together peacefully, but I believe the reason it happened is because they were devoted to art. The Alhambra, take that as an example. This is, okay, so my summary points. Eudaimonia embeds the negative within the positive. It is dialectically rich. Eudaimonia often occurs in encounters with the negative, the capacity to make the most of yourself and your life is good for your health. It can be promoted with clinical interventions and educational programs, and the arts may be key ingredients for nourishing eudaimonia. And let's end with really good. Thank you.
Now you know how Ryff will be.